Yes, it's a little overpriced, but other than that, no, it's great. I have hundreds of millions of users on multiple services. Like, the bubble thing is way overplayed.
Way overplayed. You, Michael, you famously sold Vivo to AOL for rather a lot of money. How's that working out for you, by the way? And why do you never respond to all my emails about how I need loans? Anyway, you're back in during the last, shall we call it a bubble, back in the 2000s, that to some extent was a bubble in a sense. And I agree with you, Dave, it's never been a better time to be in tech right now. But back in the day, we had incubators, didn't we? People would build, basically buy a building, stuff it with technology, what they thought were technology companies, some were, some weren't, and gave them a free desk and a chair and a cool receptionist or whatever, and took equity in the company. But we don't really have that. Those kinds of companies, those incubators, didn't really work in those days. But you're doing a very interesting project now. You're doing a couple of things, aren't you? You're involved in Founders House in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Founders, sorry, Den.
Yeah.
And you're also doing your own kind of labs. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, Founders Den is a shared office space in San Francisco. So it's a little bit like an incubator of old, but they don't take equity. It's really just a place where startups can work. They can be there for up to 6 months, but you're not allowed to stay for more than 6 months. And it's a way that you can share knowledge with a lot of other startups, not be doing it entirely alone in your journey. They hold a lot of events where they get speakers in to impart their wisdom on the tenets of the time. And there's been quite a few, that's one format. There's a lot of shared working spaces in San Francisco. There seems to be a new one every few months now. That's become incredibly popular. It's very useful in that you don't have leases. It's very hard when you're very embryonic to rent an office lease, which is normally 2 or 3 years in San Francisco at least. And you're locked in and you've got this tiny room because you're 1 or 2 people and then you're outgrowing. So it's a very flexible way of sort of getting started on that journey. And then the company that we set up about 2 years ago, Monkey Inferno, it's not an incubator, it's more of a labs type setup. Kevin Rose has set up Milk in San Francisco along the same lines. And that's something that a lot of people who have had an exit are more and more starting to think of doing, and I've had a lot of other people approach me wanting to talk about it, who've recently sold out as well. And that's where the entrepreneur wants to do more startups, but they don't want to just do one. I mean, everyone nowadays pivots, so they do something and then they pivot. And this avoids pivoting because we sort of pivot before we even started. We do 5 startups in parallel. We know that they're not all going to work. It's unrealistic that they will, but hopefully out of those 5, 1 or 2 will work, and we'll end up focusing more and more on those 1 or 2 that do work. But it's our own funding, our own employees. We give share options to all of the employees, so they get equal options in every company, whether they have to work on that project or not. The employees love it because they know they're much more likely to walk away with equity that's going to be worth something because they managed to hedge their bets 5 ways rather than 1 way, which you do if you join an early stage startup. We have two engineers on each project, so it's very, very small teams. We'll increase that number once it's live and once it's gained traction, but up to that point, 2 engineers is fine. And then we share resources like designers, product management, operations, and so on.
Jeff, in your perspective, you were at Yahoo. Let's say you were at Yahoo.
You want to talk about the bubbling and not?
No, I want to say Yahoo was innovative once, and I'm sure you know all about that. What's your view where we are then at the moment? I mean,
let me say a word on the bubble because I think it's all well and good to say shut the fuck up about it, but the no offense, Dave, but the belief in the bubble comes from something. I just think it's a confusion between a bubble which has to do with irrational expectations and belief in the value of assets, whether it be tulips or Yahoo, which in a very short period of time went from about $150 a share to $4 a share. That hurts. Compared to the situation now where there's actually a lot of capital chasing after relatively little quality. And so what happens is the prices of everyone get bid up. And what that doesn't mean is that it's a bubble. What it does mean is that, as Dave would say, watch the fuck out if you're an investor. Because it's harder, because you're going to get in at a higher price, especially at the quality deals. And you better be really smart. Dave's really smart, so he's going to do fine. But you better be really smart and really figure out what the right deals are. But I agree with Dave. I don't think it's a bubble. We don't think it's a bubble.
I mean, if we want to dive into that a little bit more, I think we should be talking about like what are the active dynamics in pricing for entrepreneurs. And I think there's two factors going on, at least in Silicon Valley. There's two factors that I see going on recently, where you have large investors who feel like they're losing access to seed stage deals who are willing to move downstream, and they're probably more price insensitive because they feel they can get ownership later in the cycle. You also have a bunch of nouveau riche, for lack of a better word, but like people at Google, at Facebook, at Twitter, at Zynga, at LinkedIn now in a few more weeks have a lot of money and probably are less concerned about price and more interested in just being in the game, investing in startups, or maybe they're new. So like when I came out of PayPal 6-7 years ago, I had about $300,000, really didn't know what the hell I was doing when I was doing investing, and I was much less concerned about price, much less ability to control price because I was typically the smallest investor in the deal. So between the factor of lots of new angels who are getting in who are price insensitive, and lots of larger investors who are price insensitive in the first round and want to get access to deals, those two things are driving up prices for early stage deals.
And add one more, which is that there's this overall focus on seed, and a number of so-called super angels or mini VCs have sprung up to really focus right on those deals. So you do have just a lot of capital flowing after these very early stage companies. And there's a good reason for that too, and that's another fundamental thing that's changed, which is that very young companies with very few resources can get much farther along in offering their services than they ever could before. And you can have very young companies with 1 million users, and you couldn't imagine even doing that because you couldn't afford the 74 Sun web boxes that you would need to buy.
So there was an interesting Wall Street Journal article recently that touched a lot of nerves to some extent about the money drawing out, the tide drawing in from startups to some extent, and venture capitals, VCs starting to batten down the hatches, and also the macroeconomic environment of the global credit crunch is concerning.
There probably is, like, over the last 10 years, there's definitely been more money going into startups from venture capital than probably has been exited from the IPO markets and M&A. So from that perspective, yeah, it's been a little out of whack. But there's also been incredibly large companies created, and whether we're talking about the Google, Apple, Amazons of the world, or whether we're talking about sort of very more recent trends like Groupons and social, et cetera, there's a tremendous amount of revenue and users being generated in a very short period of time. So there is reason to be optimistic, and there is reason to put money to work. But there are a lot of people putting money to work who perhaps are not always as thoughtful about valuations.
Let me say the same thing a little differently, which is even when the bubble burst, we used to laugh at Yahoo because our user growth never changed. And the fundamental transformative nature of the connected world didn't go away. And all the things that Dave was talking about are very real. And I'd say the difference now between then is there's so much hard cash being generated by so many companies. People are making a lot of money. And so one of the things that people are chasing after is a Groupon, because Groupon is not just an incredibly fast-growing company, but it's an incredibly fast-growing company in revenue and in profit. Well, maybe not profit. In revenue, profit will come.
In curiously calculated profit.
Yes.
Curiously calculated, yes, accounting system, they have that. But we had some very short, quick-fire panel, but we're going to have to be thrown off the stage shortly. But let me go through you guys quickly, starting with Jeff. Where are we now? Obviously, we'll talk about where we are now. Let's have a little bit of a vision into the future. I mean, would you say some of the next big things are obviously in the mobile space?
Well, it's funny that
social, mobile, location.
Ross, I think, who just got off the stage and said he's going to outsource his mobile app. And I think you sort of said, okay, you're going to outsource your mobile app. Don't fucking outsource the mobile app. Mobile is, I like to call it pervasive computing. Everyone's going to have their compute with them at all times, and it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about your mobile device, which will leave with you all the time, or whether you're sitting at a desk. But you can't outsource the core of what you're building, which is hopefully a great user interface. And Dave said, what about Google? Well, you can beat Google, but you have to be better than Google. So don't figure out how the operators are going to win for you. Figure out how you can build the best experience, the simplest experience in the world, and get it on the right devices, and then you can win. And I think that following the trends that have begun really with the iPhone and will not stop, will not end until all this web shit disappears and it's just part of our world and people are just building incredible software. When Mark Andreessen says software is going to eat the world, it is. It's eating everything. So build great new software that eats something that hadn't been eaten before, and you will win.
Dave, 500 startups famously named because you're practically investing in 500. What are some of the trends that you see? I mean, your investments.
I think what's really great about kind of the popular adoption of all these services is you can actually get more niche and more focused on a particular customer segment. So I think one of my reactions to the recent pitches was they seemed a little broad. Actually, the one that I liked, Pocalytics, was very specific about what it was doing.
Getting the date.
Yeah, because I think when you have I don't know, there's 7 billion people here on the planet soon, and let's say half of them are connected. So it's actually kind of easy to find 1 million people doing a very specific thing that you're offering. So I think rather than trying to be too broad and competing with 100 other companies doing group buying services or doing some social sharing service, if you can say, hey, I'm going to focus on language education solutions for mothers between the ages of 25 and 35 in urban North America, then you're very, very targeted, right? And I think there's a lot of problems to be solved that people will pay money for rather than just some mumbo-jumbo social media bullshit. And I think getting too arcane with our ideas is perhaps the problem.
Going down the rabbit hole of...
Yeah, so I mean, like, a trend that I think we're looking very closely at is web and mobile solutions for families, parents, and kids. And it's an incredibly underinvested category. Most entrepreneurs are single and male, so they have little familiarity with the problems. But last time I checked, moms and kids was a pretty goddamn big segment. And I think there's a lot of monetization opportunity there.
And I can tell you for sure Apple's
Right, and this device is going to be extremely prolific and very monetizable.
We'll get thrown off quickly. Just Mike, what sort of themes are going to come out of Monkey Inferno, do you think, over the next year or so?
Themes?
Yeah. Startups or whatever you do.
I'm just going to use the opportunity to plug one thing then, if you were asked. We just launched a website on Friday called Water Forward, which is it's actually a non-profit venture, which is a little unusual for a for-profit company, so we're not going to profit from it. We're doing it with charity water, and it's designed to be viral and it's designed to raise a crazy amount of money for a charity that's here in my art, which is providing water to people over developing countries that don't have it. So it's called waterforward.org. The concept of the site is you put people in a book. It costs you $10 for each person in the book. It's a digital book online. You can see it that made. You're not allowed to put yourself in. You're only allowed to put other people in. In fact, you're only allowed to put other people in once you've been put in. So it's a little bit like a pyramid scheme or a chain letter, but it doesn't screw anyone. It actually helps people. So I'm very happy if everyone sign up and do at least $10. If you're not already in the book, then there's something called a random act of kindness where kind people convert people they don't even know in the book. It all spreads out from one person to hopefully everyone on Facebook and Twitter. That's my plug. You didn't ask that, but there you go. That's the theme.
That's the future.
Thanks a million. And as they're leaving the stage, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our next speaker.